The vibes, guys. Welcome to Ropeadope TV here at the Ropeadope Room in East Philadelphia along the railroad tracks. I'm Fabian Brown. I'm here with
Louis Marks. Hello, hello.
I love it, man. I'm excited about tonight because we are going to talk about the key moments in the past 20 years of Ropeadope. And there's a lot of key moments, man.
A time for reflection.
It's a great time for reflection. We did something similar on our radio program that we do with Kramos and the Cooks. So, guys, make sure you refer back to that for a nice radio show that Mr. Louis Marks put together, man. It really gives a great overview, I think, of what represents the past 20 years of music. What do you think?
Well, we're trying, yeah. So there are 12 radio episodes, and they're going to chronicle different moments in Ropeadope history. But instead of starting at A and ending in Z, which is super boring, the first episode was key moments in Ropeadope history. So you can go back to Mixcloud, Kramos and the Cooks, or to the 21 Soul Mixcloud and start with episode 1. And so that's what I think we're going to try to cover tonight. We can get some stories in where in a radio program you wouldn't get some stories in. So you can just kind of get two browsers up, toggle between the two, and have some fun. If this is your idea of fun,
that's great. This is my idea of fun.
It's my idea of fun.
Whiskeys, beers.
I do recommend a whiskey to go with your historical journey.
Okay, in preparation for the show, I went to Ropeadope.com. Because listen, we're fortunate because we have like the almanac of everything Ropeadope sitting right next to me. All right, so 1999 is where this whole crazy adventure and this whole journey began, and I think I saw somewhere DJ Logic.
Yeah, well, you mentioned it, right? So Ropeadope begins with the single purpose of releasing DJ Logic's Project Logic. So I have to issue a disclaimer to your comment.
Okay.
I know. I probably know more than anyone about the full 20 years of Ropeadope.
Okay.
But I did not come on board with Ropeadope in any capacity until at least 2001. So.
Okay, that's a great starting point. So, 1999 inception of Ropeadope. You come on 2001, but you don't come on as CEO Louis Marks Ropeadope.
No, I was not involved with the music side of Ropeadope at all.
Okay.
Somebody posted on Twitter yesterday. I have to digress here for a second. Somebody posted on Twitter, "Dope is such a great word. It hasn't gone out of style like all the other ones have." I still use it, and I put every damn day.
Yeah.
But that's because I say Ropeadope. But it was actually two different companies at that point. So 1999 starts Ropeadope, where the company is formed to release DJ Logic's Presenting Project Logic. Okay. Because the label wouldn't take it, right? At that time. So the record does really well, and a succession of important albums followed. Okay. Some of which we covered in the radio show.
Right.
Talking about the Philadelphia Experiment.
Spanish Harlem Orchestra.
Spanish Harlem Orchestra, yeah. And then moving on to The Word in those early years, right? I am in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, running a clothing company. Okay. And just so happens that there is also Ropeadope Clothing, Ropeadope Industries. All right, Ropeadope Industries printed up some T-shirts with the Ropeadope brand. Took them out on the road with DJ Logic.
I didn't know this.
Right?
Okay.
And they sold more Ropeadope T-shirts than they sold DJ Logic T-shirts. So
that's great.
That started this clothing brand. So there were two separate companies, and I was working very closely with the Ropeadope Industries clothing company
line.
In the early years, 2001, 2002. And what we did was create, print the T-shirts, set up websites, pick, pack, ship, customer service for Ropeadope and many others, actually. OK Player, Def Jux, Duck Down Records,
wow.
Daptone Records, J-Dub Records, and many more.
Sharon Jones? No?
Sharon was on Daptone, yeah.
Okay, got it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's you just dropped a little nugget on me on that one. So, music, clothing, they combine forces. And I don't want to fast forward too much. I want to kind of talk a little bit more about the music before that merger, I guess you would call it. We're talking about key points, Louis, and I think 2004, 2005, Hurricane Katrina.
That's another key point that we cover for sure.
Because that brings it.
Ropeadope had released quite a few what I would call, or what someone referenced, and now I call it that, historically important records.
Okay.
These are the kinds of records that, we now have people coming to us going, I grew up on this stuff, right? But one of those historically important records was King Britt presents Sister Gertrude Morgan.
Yep.
2005 or 6. When did the levees fail?
I think 05.
05?
I think
the
so.
fall of 05? Makes sense. Hurricane Katrina? I think it's 05,
These guys were not even...
So I was at Jazz Fest.
You were born.
That year, where I saw Dr. John, rest in peace, twice in one day.
Nice.
Yeah, so this, the Sister Gertrude Morgan record that King Britt did, there was an original recording of Sister Gertrude Morgan.
Yeah.
Put out by Preservation Hall.
Yes.
And then King Britt and Tim Motzer wrote an entire score that you really can't call it a remix. It's a whole new album using that music as a base layer. And that's the moment when I got really heavily involved with Ropeadope on the music side, because things were looking pretty challenging at that point.
And I want to touch on at that time too. So bringing it back to the clothing line, so Ropeadope did something really significant with the brand and with the shirts. And tell me a little bit about how paying it forward worked. How musicians were displaced. Instruments were lost.
New Orleans.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that. I mean, it was a sense of urgency, and I got a phone call. I got several phone calls. I was on vacation, and about, we need to print these T-shirts. It's New Orleans. We need to do it now, because of the storm. And I was kind of watching on TV, but I wasn't, I don't know if I wasn't getting the concept, but finally I'm like, okay, let's go,
Right.
Maybe 3 or 4 days went by. And it was in conjunction with Ben Jaffe at Preservation Hall, and it just said Re-New Orleans, Re in red and New Orleans in white, right? And the idea was, sell these T-shirts for $20 or $25, probably $25. Take a percentage of that money, send it down to Ben's foundation, the New Orleans Musician Hurricane Relief Fund, and then he would distribute money directly to musicians without a lot of red tape. So I think we raised $90,000 over the next few months.
Wow.
And the beauty of it was, people would call Ben or whoever was working with Ben and say, I'm here, I'm in Nashville. I can't get back to my house, but my guitar was in the house, and I'm pretty sure it's destroyed. So I need a guitar so I can get back out on the road and play. And it's $1,000 or it's $2,000. And you're like, okay, here's your guitar.
Wow.
So, but a further thing happened, and that was that people started buying them in New Orleans, which we didn't, the idea was to sell them to people outside of New Orleans so we could funnel money into New Orleans, right? But people in New Orleans started to buy them. And I think we had like a discounted rate down at some of the shops. And apparently they're everywhere, because years later, when David Simon did the show Terrace.
Yep.
They were looking at photos to try to recreate the second line that happened after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And everybody was wearing a Re-New Orleans T-shirt, and there's Re-New Orleans on the tuba,
That's awesome.
So they ordered a bunch of those, and if you watch episode 4, I think of season 1 of Terrace, you'll see the second line marching down the street with Re-New Orleans banner, and it says Ropeadope on one side, and Preservation Hall on the other side. So
That's,
that was a great moment. I mean, it
that's
felt really good, and I think it set us on further solidified our sense of purpose
okay.
about what the label is. I mean,
It's interesting.
gave it more meaning than just we're putting out records.
That's a good segue. Speaking of putting out records, stay tuned because further in the episode, we're going to be listening to some unreleased music from Mr. Jimmy Stevens, who actually put together some musicians from Philadelphia and some musicians from New Orleans. So that's a good little tie there. I'm reading my notes, right? And it says, okay, in 2007, the label moves to Philadelphia and releases 2 records a month, introducing new Philly hip hop and jazz artists. The question always comes up, is this really a jazz label? So here, Philly hip hop and jazz artists alongside electronic and electric and rock artists. Okay, so
Yeah.
Talk a little bit to me about, is this a jazz label? Is this not a jazz label? We have a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
It never really was. It never really was a jazz label. So, like, the reason DJ Logic's record, the reason Ropeadope existed was because people couldn't envision a turntablist as a soloist in a jazz band, right? So it was like, okay, this new genre, Ropeadope, is born, right? And then if you look at the subsequent stuff, sure, the Philadelphia Experiment has Amir and Yuri Kane and Christian McBride, Philadelphia heavy hitters, but I guess that's a jazz album. I don't think at the time they thought it was truly a jazz album. And then you have things like the Tin Hat Trio.
Yep.
But I guess as you go over time, then you had Scratch from the early days, and then a really key figure, Gennaro Jarrell, right, which is electronic / hip hop, right? So it was always that. But I think that over time, it just seems like maybe the fact is that the jazz police were more strict, and so the people who had jazz that had a little bit of different flavor to it had to go somewhere.
All right,
do you know what I mean?
Pause. Jazz police?
Come on. Yeah,
I mean,
like you don't know.
Well, there might be
talk
people.
about.
There might be people who don't know what that means, and you don't have to break it down or anything, but that'd be kind of cool if you did. Just saying.
Well, I can only give you my perspective.
Okay.
And gladly. Oh boy, how much time we have? Yeah.
In a few sentences.
In a few sentences. Dominant culture calls the music of
not dominant culture.
Of the not dominant culture, jackass music. It gets shortened to jazz. Mm-hmm. People start to actually like it despite every effort against it. So they move it to New York, put it in Lincoln Center, package it up nice, and call it some form of classical music, which is then dominated by the same people. Is that too much?
That's
too much?
That's great.
Look, I like the process. I like the trajectory. People need, jazz is a high art, right? I get it.
Yep.
I get it, right? So you want to elevate it to the level of classical music or beyond, but what you lose in the process when it starts to become closed and has its own set of definitions, and you can't get into the symphony hall, because it's too expensive, or because you're not pedigreed as a player, or because you wear your baseball cap sideways, or you even have a fucking baseball cap, right? So that when it starts to get there, then there are layers and layers of that kind of exclusion, and then all of a sudden there's an exodus, right? So people go and be like, you know what, I want to do jazz the way I want to do it, and those are the people that come here. So if we're a jazz label, we're that. We're like a jazz exodus label,
That's what I was going for. Holy shit, that's pretty, I hope you guys got that.
Oh, that's why we record these things.
I hope you guys got that.
It makes sense to me when you play it back.
So fun. All right, so
I'm not too embarrassed.
So not jazz, but I get it. The place where jazz musicians go to come to create music they want to create, almost like genre-less. They're doing what they want to do.
They're jazz players.
Right.
A lot of it is jazz based, but there's always some added elements. Some people just want to make the music they want to make. Some people come at it from different backgrounds.
Okay.
Some people want to take jazz and expand it further than the person said that jazz should be expanded. So we have all of that. So if we're a jazz label and we put out primarily jazz releases, it's just because there are that many people, more people coming to us, right? I mean, the number of heavy metal records that have been sent to Ropeadope in 20 years is exactly 0.
I was gonna say.
Right? Right? And the number of pop records that have been sent to Ropeadope over the last 20 years is probably under 5.
Okay.
Right? The number of hip-hop records is a little higher.
Right.
And the number of, I would call them country, Americana, rock, and that's where we start to get into that. I think the band was Cabinet.
Yeah.
When we talk about, that's a bluegrass band with drums. Also, immigrants in their own way, because no self-respecting bluegrass band would have a drummer, according to the bluegrass posse. That we call that,
Their
right?
squad.
So no, it's really just a question of who comes to us, and what we do with it after that. So we never really rejected things that weren't jazz.
Right.
It's just that more jazz people come to us.
No, I get it. I get it. Okay, so in the spirit of the context of what we're talking about here, the overview of this thing called Ropeadope the past 20 years, the key moments, the key points. You were on that clothing side. I fast forward a little bit. Where does Louis Marks? What's that story? When do you get behind the helm? Break that down for us. What's the transition like? What's the story?
Yeah, I mean, so I bought the company in 2006.
Okay.
Right after the Levy failure, and really did not intend to be involved on the music side in any way.
Okay.
But over the course of the next few years, and really when we round the corner in 2010, 2011, it just became evident that we were under a lot of stress, a lot of challenges,
Yep.
and it became evident that I needed to kind of jump in and take the helm. Mind you, I don't know if I knew how to do the job, but I certainly didn't think I did. Huh?
How many instruments do you play?
0.
Okay, got it.
I mean, I tried to play guitar, and my goal in guitar was basically John Prine's statement. I learned these 2 or 3 chords, and I liked them so much I never bothered to learn anymore. So like that was as high as I wanted to get, and I failed.
You failed at that?
I did. I think at my best I could play like Ring of Fire by Johnny Cash, which is like,
I was gonna say Smoke on the Water.
Embarrassingly,
gonna play that one.
No, honestly, like, so I mean, the chords are, the bar chords are were a little bit more challenging for me.
That's.
I never told you my guitar story.
I don't think so.
So I bought it. I probably told it on this camera before, but I'll say it again. I go to the store now. I'm a man of like 40 years old or so, so I'm gonna learn how to play guitar.
Okay.
And I wanted to play with my kids. My kids would take lessons, so I'm like, we're all gonna take lessons together, right? So I go down and I buy a Martin, like a classic Dreadnought Martin, and it's wonderful. It's a beautiful guitar.
Yeah.
Right. And
right from the top, I like it.
And 2 weeks later, I take it back, and I'm like, I don't know if it's like something wrong. It's like the action's too high. He goes, oh well, play a chord for me. I played a chord. He goes, no, the guitar's fine. You suck. Right in the store, and I was like, fair enough. Like, what do you suggest? And he says, every mistake you make on that Martin is going to bounce like from here across the room. So it's not really a starter guitar. So then he got me a Guild, and it was, because I could afford it, at that time, and I still tried to play, but I just, and that's I developed this profound respect for musicians from
your experience.
Actually trying.
Yeah.
I mean, there's people out there looking up on stage and going, yeah, he's not as good as so and so. It's like he's doing more than you even could dream of your entire life. So
The critics.
yeah, a lot of respect for that.
Well, I want to take a quick pause and just kind of segue into what we're listening to, what we've listened to, what we are listening to, and what we have listened to. We came in with DJ Logic, Ninth Ward Blues. We heard some Terrace Martin, Tribe Called West, Colonel Bruce Hampton, Pharaoh's Kitchen, Shaun Martin, Lotus, and now that brings us up to speed with some unreleased music from Mr. Jimmy Stevens. And I love the story of Jimmy, you know, and the progression that he's had here at Ropeadope musically. Mm-hmm. And I feel that this album, it's like he nailed it. Like,
Summer never left a blessed good time. Shop for wedding rings. This living is fine.
Honestly have to say that if you told me that woman grew up in rural Arkansas to a family of generations of country music players, singers, I would say, yeah, of course.
And that's completely not the case with Miss Ariel Sky. I think she's from New York City.
And works in the oncology ward at Children's Hospital, Pennsylvania, and debut on this album. It doesn't hurt to have Shaun Martin playing piano, right? I'm guessing.
No, Shaun Martin is definitely on piano on this track. It's funny, you know, Jimmy got himself into the producer hat on this album and really put a monster cast of musicians together and allow them to do exactly what they were built to do.
We get to see that growth and maturity for musicians on a regular basis, and that's interesting. So we got a lot of heavy cats on the label, but a lot of times it's their debut record, right? It's coming off of touring with the greats,
right?
But now they're in, so they lean on their skill set. No, they can't, right? So maybe the first time they lean on their skill set and they're like, I'm a badass drummer, I'm a badass bass player, whatever, and then after a few records, they get the producer hat on, right? And they understand what it means to put your name on a fully.
I think it's the natural evolution of what a musician's journey, not everyone's, but in artist journeys, you know, they start off with their chops and like, you know, I'm going to master my instrument, right? And not that they get bored with that, but they want to, the challenge is always there. They're always reaching for what's next, always reaching for what's next. And once they get their chops together on their instrument, you know, maybe they learn some other instruments, you know, and they learn some other skills, man. And, you know, producing and you know, gathering a cast of musicians, that's a talent, man. That's something that should be
incredible
talked about, you know?
Incredible, yeah.
So, all right, so, you know, as we're kind of bringing this down a little bit, Louis, you know, we got the earlier years, and this is just meant to be an overview. We can probably spend a whole episode on just, you know, a year of Ropeadope. You know, so we got to the point, you know, you made the switch from, you know, the clothing brand side to, you know, driving the ship of this crazy thing called Ropeadope. On another episode, we talk about, you know, Snarky Puppy and, you know, and the Grammy and Layla Hathaway and all that great stuff. Another milestone.
Pivotal moment.
You know, another launches us. Talk to me a little bit from that moment almost to like current day. You know, because there's a lot of stuff going on that, you know, some things that people may know, some people may not know.
Right. Well, Snarky Puppy was really fascinating, and as you mentioned, there's a whole episode on the evolution of that. But you know, I got to step back actually, because I want to say it occurred to me as we were preparing for this episode, which means, you know, having a whiskey and smoking a cigarette, and it occurred to me that Ropeadope is what happens when you dream some outlandish thing up.
Yeah.
And then you have to actually do what you said it was going to be.
Okay.
Right? And, you know, props to the founders for dreaming this outrageous dream. And the minute you dream that outrageous dream, then suddenly, like, you become the servant of that dream, right? And then everybody who comes into it, and I'm sure everybody in this room is starting to feel that, right? It's like, this is this thing, right? So it's funny to look back and say, well, there were all these challenges, and why wouldn't you just stop? You know? And the answer to why didn't you stop is because Ropeadope, you know, because it's freaking cool, you know?
Yeah.
And we always felt that all the time. So I forgot your question.
No, man, you're going into it, man.
We came back, right? You know, I collapsed the label. I literally was operating at my house and reinvented the label, took the helm at probably the most difficult time in the history of Ropeadope. You know, and a funny thing happened on the way to doing that is Snarky Puppy really did everything right, ramped up, and then it was sort of like, oh, game again, let's go. All right, you know, Phoenix from the flames in a lot of ways, right? But at the time, and still to this day, the question is whether or not what is a record label? What does it do? Why is it here? What's going to happen in the music business? You know, you read about it every day. You know, and so again, you take the information that's out there and you look at the ridiculous challenges that musicians face and what's happening with the market, and you make it up. So you know what happened between Snarky Puppy and now is a new invention.
I love
it. A collaborative, distributed network of musicians working together to build whatever the next chapter is. I'm not sure.
And on that note, whatever the next chapter is, guys, we gave you a preview, I think, of a little taste of what the history of Ropeadope is. You know, come back and finish this journey with us. I'm pretty sure there's a lot more crazy stories that you have in there as well.
I only had one whiskey this time.
We're gonna grab a whiskey. You know, do all the fun stuff, guys. Share us, leave some comments, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and. You know, we got to fill up here, man.
Yeah, we do. Shout out to the crew, everybody, producers. We'll put the names in the credits. A special shout out to Dr. Derek Dean for the fruit flies.
For the
What is like every fruit fly in...
Only I do.